The wind howled across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory, 1887. It carried the promise of an early winter, and Thomas Garrett, at 24 years old, felt it in his bones. He pulled his worn coat tighter, surveying his 300 acres of stubborn land from a hilltop. 43 head of cattle huddled by the creek. It wasn't much, but it was his, built from sweat after fever took his parents 5 years back. They'd left him the land, but they'd also left him their caution, their distrust of the world. His father was a stern man who believed in keeping to oneself. His mother, gentler, had reinforced the lesson. "Keep your heart locked up tight, Tommy," she'd whispered on her deathbed. "This world ain't kind to those who feel too much." He'd taken those words to heart. In 5 years, he'd barely spoken to anyone. The other ranchers called him the hermit. He didn't drink, didn't court, didn't even keep company. Loneliness was a small price for peace, or so he thought. Dark clouds were rolling in from the north, moving with a speed that wasn't natural. Thomas frowned. These weren't ordinary storm clouds. They carried the weight of a blizzard. The air grew still and heavy, the birds vanished, and the wind itself seemed to hold its breath. He spurred his horse, Bell, toward the herd, trying to get them to the shelter of the eastern valley. But the temperature plummeted. His breath froze in his beard. Snowflakes fell, first large and wet, then small and hard, driven horizontal by a wind that screamed from every direction at once. In minutes, he couldn't see Bell's ears. The world became a white wall of fury. He'd miscalculated. This was a killer blizzard, the kind that left cattle frozen standing and men lost 50 feet from their own barn. He had to find shelter. The ranch house was 3 miles back. Impossible. Bell stumbled, and a cold dread washed over him. He'd lost all sense of direction. He gave Bell her head, trusting her instincts. The mare pushed forward, head low, fighting through drifts that appeared from nowhere. Thomas's hands went numb. Ice formed on his eyelashes. Just when he thought they were done for, Bell stopped so suddenly he nearly flew over her neck. Through the swirling snow he saw it, a flicker of orange light. Fire. Fire meant people. People meant shelter. He slid off Bell and stumbled toward the light. It came from a small structure tucked against a rocky outcrop. A teepee. He'd never seen one this far from the reservation. Thomas hesitated. Indians. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Can't trust 'em, son. They smile at your face and put a knife in your back." But the cold was a knife already, cutting through his coat, his skin, his very bones. Pride and prejudice were luxuries he couldn't afford. He approached the entrance, a flap of hide glowing from the fire within. His frozen fingers fumbled as he knocked on a wooden pole. "Hello," his voice was a croak. "I'm sorry to bother. I'm caught in the storm." The flap pulled aside. He found himself looking into dark eyes that held both weariness and surprise. A young woman stood there, maybe 20, with long black hair braided down her back. Behind her, an older woman rose from beside the fire. Both wore traditional dress, soft doe skin decorated with beadwork that caught the firelight. They stared at each other. Thomas knew what they saw. A white man, armed, at their door. He could see their tension, the way the older one's hand moved to a knife at her belt. He couldn't blame them. "Please," he said, his teeth chattering. "My horse. No, we're lost. I mean no harm." The younger woman looked at her sister. They exchanged words in their own language, quick and low. The older one nodded slightly. "Come," the younger woman said in accented English. "Bring horse." Thomas nearly wept with relief. He tugged Bell forward, and they showed him where to tie her on the lee side of the teepee. His fingers were too numb to work the knots, and without a word, the older sister took over, her hands quick and efficient. Inside, the warmth hit him like a physical blow. A small fire burned in the center. Buffalo robes and blankets created a cozy circle around the flames. It smelled of smoke, leather, and brewing herbs. Thomas stood awkwardly, dripping melting snow. The younger woman gestured to a spot near the fire. "Sit, you freeze standing there." He collapsed more than sat, his legs giving out. The older sister studied him, then said something to the younger one, who began preparing something in a small clay pot. "I'm Thomas Garrett," he managed. "I have a ranch about 3 miles south, I think." I am Mary, the younger woman said, surprising him with a Christian name. This my sister, Sarah. Mary, Sarah, not the names he expected. He must have shown his surprise because Mary smiled slightly. Mission school, she explained. They give us new names. Say our real names too hard for white tongues. There was no bitterness in her voice, just fact. Sarah handed him a cup of something hot and bitter, with an aftertaste of pine. Medicine tea, Mary said. Warm you inside. As feeling returned to his fingers and toes, pain came with it, burning like hot coals. He winced. Pain is good, Sarah said, her first words to him. Means no frostbite. Drink more. They moved around him with quiet efficiency, hanging his wet coat, offering him a blanket. Their kindness confused him. Everything he'd been taught said Indians were savage, not to be trusted. But here were two young women sharing their shelter, their medicine, their warmth. Why? He asked suddenly. Why help me? Mary and Sarah exchanged glances. Then Mary sat across from him, her face serious. Storm does not care if you're white or Apache. Cold kills all same. We know what it means to need shelter. The wind rattled the teepee, but inside an unexpected peace settled over him. He found himself talking, really talking, for the first time in years. He told them about the ranch, the cattle, the isolation. They listened without judgment. You have no woman? Sarah asked eventually. No children? Heat rose to his face. No, I keep to myself. Mary tilted her head, studying him with those penetrating dark eyes. Young man with land, cattle, white women must want you for husband. I don't. That is, I haven't. He couldn't explain. How could he tell them he'd never even kissed a woman? That the thought of courtship, of opening his heart, terrified him more than any blizzard. But somehow they seemed to understand. As the night deepened, he realized something had shifted inside him. For the first time in 5 years, he didn't feel alone. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. Mary smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to beautiful. A virgin rancher took shelter with 2 Apache sisters, she said, her eyes twinkling. This night will change him forever. Thomas choked on his tea. I'm not. How did you? Sarah laughed, a sound like wind chimes. We have eyes. We see man who does not know women. Is nothing shameful. But Thomas felt the shame anyway, burning hotter than the fire. Here he was, the civilized one. Yet these women saw right through him, saw his inexperience, his fear, his loneliness, and still offered him shelter. The wind howled, but inside, wrapped in warmth and unexpected acceptance, Thomas Garrett began to feel something he'd thought lost forever. The possibility of connection. As the fire burned low, he thought he heard his mother's voice on the wind. But this time, instead of warning him to lock his heart away, she seemed to whisper, Sometimes, Tommy, the greatest courage is in learning to trust. The first thing Thomas noticed when he woke was the silence. The howling wind had died to a whisper. Gray morning light filtered through the smoke hole. Mary sat near the entrance, her fingers moving with practiced precision over some beadwork. Sarah was gone. When Mary saw he was awake, she set her work aside. Storm passed, she said simply. Your horse is well. He sat up, his body stiff. I should go. Check on my cattle. Mary nodded, but handed him a wooden bowl of something that smelled like sage and wild onions. Eat first. Long ride in snow. It was surprisingly good, hearty, and warming. White men usually don't like our food, she said with a small smile. White men are fool, he said without thinking, then flushed. Mary's smile widened. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You not fool. I think just lonely. The accuracy of her observation made him uncomfortable. Why you live alone? Your parents gone? Fever took them 5 years ago. Is hard, being alone. We know this, she said, her voice heavy with experience. Sarah and me, we have only each other now. Father killed at Sand Creek. Mother died of sickness after brothers taken to reservation. Thomas knew about Sand Creek, the massacre. He didn't know what to say. Sarah entered then, carrying firewood, snow dusting her hair. She spoke to Mary in Apache, and Mary responded. Sarah's eyebrows rose as she studied Thomas. She said something that made Mary laugh. What? Thomas asked. She says you look less like frozen rabbit this morning? Mary translated. More like nervous deer. He smiled. Nervous deer is probably accurate. Sarah sat by the fire. You have woman waiting? Wonder where you are. No, Thomas said. No one wonders where I am most days. The sisters exchanged one of their meaningful looks. Come, Mary said, rising. We show you something. Outside, the world had transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine. He saw how cleverly their teepee was positioned, protected by the rock outcrop, angled to deflect wind. This wasn't a temporary camp. Apache women build homes, Sarah said with quiet pride. Men hunt, fight, women make life possible. They showed him their food cache, the herbs growing in sheltered spots. He was fascinated. His mother had known some plant medicine, but nothing like this. How do you remember it all? Mother teach daughter, grandmother teach mother, Mary explained. Goes back forever. They were circling back when Sarah suddenly stopped, her body tense. She said something sharp in Apache, and Mary's hand went to her knife. Thomas followed their gaze and saw riders in the distance, 3 men moving slowly through the snow. Get inside, Sarah ordered, but Thomas recognized the lead rider's yellow coat. Wait, that's Jim Henderson. He has the ranch north of mine. They must be looking for survivors. The women relaxed slightly but didn't lower their guard. He understood. 3 white men finding 2 Apache women alone could go bad quickly. I'll talk to them, he said. Tell them I sheltered here. They won't cause trouble if I'm here. Sarah looked skeptical, but Mary nodded. We trust you. Those 3 words hit him hard. When was the last time anyone had trusted him? The riders approached. Jim Henderson, his son Pete, and their hired hand, a mean-spirited man named Dobbs. Garrett, Jim called out. Christ almighty, boy. We thought you were frozen dead for sure. Nearly was, Thomas replied, moving to meet them before they got too close. Found shelter just in time. Pete's eyes fixed on the teepee and on Mary and Sarah standing near its entrance. Well, what have we here? The ladies were kind enough to share their shelter, Thomas said firmly. I owe them my life. Dobbs spit tobacco juice into the snow. Apache squaws. Ain't supposed to be off the reservation. Storm didn't care about reservations, Thomas said, his voice level. Neither did their kindness. Jim was studying the situation, weighing his options. You know, I have to report this, Thomas, he said finally. It's the law. You know what happens to women sent to the reservation alone? Thomas countered. Is that Christian? Pete laughed, an ugly sound. Since when do you care about squaws, Garrett? Hell, since when do you care about any woman? We all figured you preferred sheep. The insult was meant to provoke, and it worked. Rage, hot and unfamiliar, rose in his chest. But before he could respond, Mary stepped forward. We saved his life, she said clearly. Fed him, kept him warm. This how white men repay kindness? Nobody asked your opinion, girl, Dobbs growled. I'm asking it, Thomas said, surprising everyone, including himself. And I'm telling you all to move along. Nothing to report here. The atmosphere shifted, became dangerous. Thomas had never challenged anyone before. Jim studied him for a long moment. This ain't like you, Thomas. These women got some hold on you. They showed me decency, Thomas said simply. I aim to return it. Sarah had moved up beside her sister, both women ready. Dobbs's hand drifted toward his rifle. Then Jim sighed. Hell, I didn't see nothing out here but snow. You boys see anything? Pete looked ready to argue, but his father's look silenced him. Dobbs just glared. Thought not, Jim continued. Come on, boys, let's check the southern pastures. He turned his horse, then looked back. You be careful, son. This kind of thing, it can go bad for everyone involved. After they left, Thomas found himself shaking. He'd stood up to them. He'd chosen a side, and it wasn't the one he'd been raised to choose. Why? Sarah asked. Why you risk for us? Thomas looked at the 2 women who had taken in a stranger. Because it was right, he said. Because you trusted me. Back inside the teepee, the atmosphere was different. The caution was still there, but underneath it, something warmer. Mary sat closer than before, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke in her hair. "You should go soon," Sarah said, her tone gentler now. "Check your cattle." He knew she was right, but leaving felt wrong. The thought of his empty house, his silent meals, filled him with dread. Could I, could I come back, bring supplies, as payment? The sisters consulted silently. Then Mary nodded. "You know where to find us. But Thomas, this is dangerous. For you. For us. You understand?" He understood. A white man visiting Apache women, protecting them from the law. It could get them all killed. "I understand," he said, "but I want to help." Sarah reached out and touched his hand. "Lonely dear," she said softly. "Maybe not so lonely now." As he prepared to leave, he felt the walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crack. Mary walked him to where Belle waited. "That night changed him forever," she said, echoing her words from the night before. But now there was something else in her voice, something that made his pulse quicken. "It's not night anymore," he pointed out. She smiled. "No, now is morning. New beginning, maybe." As he mounted and turned toward home, he looked back. The two women stood together, dark figures against the white snow. He raised his hand and they waved back. The ride home was cold, but his heart was warm. For the first time in 5 years, he had something to look forward to. He thought of Jim Henderson's warning, but stronger than fear was this new feeling, a connection to something beyond himself. The lonely deer had found something worth the risk. Thomas stared at the coffee, growing cold in his hands. 3 days had passed since the storm, since the night that had cracked something open inside him. The ranch house felt emptier than ever, its silence oppressive. He'd lost 4 cattle, a blow he could ill afford, but his mind kept drifting back to the teepee, to dark eyes reflecting firelight. That afternoon he loaded a pack horse with flour, salt, coffee, and a haunch of venison. He added blankets and a small packet of sugar, a luxury. The ride to their camp felt both eternal and too brief. His heart hammered, half afraid he'd find them gone. But the teepee stood where he'd left it, and relief flooded through him. Mary emerged as he approached, a colorful shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her face showed surprise, then pleasure. "Thomas, you came back." "I said I would. I brought supplies." Sarah appeared carrying a freshly cleaned rabbit. She looked at the loaded pack horse, then at him, her expression unreadable. "You risk much coming here." "You risked more taking me in." They helped him unload, exclaiming softly over the sugar. It was clear they'd been making do with very little. "Stay," Mary said as he prepared to leave. "Eat with us." He knew he should go, but the thought of returning to his empty house was unbearable. Over the next weeks, he fell into a new pattern. 3 or 4 times a week, he would ride to the teepee, bringing supplies, but also stories, questions, an eager ear for their own tales. He learned their real names, Ayana and Nashota, though they asked him to keep using their Christian names for safety. "Ayana means eternal blossom," Mary told him one afternoon, "but Mary is easier for white tongues." "I could learn," he offered. She looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "Some things are better kept hidden, safer." He learned that Sarah had been married to a warrior killed by the army. She wore her grief like armor. Mary had been promised to a man she'd never met, a future ended by the massacre at Sand Creek. "So we choose our own path," Sarah said firmly. "No man decides for us now." He found himself telling them things he'd never spoken aloud, about his father's harsh lessons, his mother's gentle attempts to soften them, the fear that had gripped him after their deaths. "My father said women make men weak," he confessed one evening. Mary laughed, not unkindly. "Your father never met Apache women. We make men stronger, if they're smart enough to see it." As winter deepened, Thomas found himself changing. The rigid control he'd maintained for so long was melting. He caught himself humming while working. Food tasted better. The sunrise seemed more beautiful. One afternoon, he arrived to find Mary alone. Sarah had gone to check their trap lines. They sat by the fire, closer than usual. "You're different now," Mary observed. Less like scared rabbit. More like nervous deer, he asked, remembering Sarah's words. No. She reached out and touched his hand, sending sparks through his entire body. More like man finding his heart. He turned his hand over, catching her fingers. He'd never held a woman's hand before. Never understood how such a simple connection could feel so profound. I've never, he started, then flushed. I know, Mary said softly. Is okay. Some men touch many women but never feel. You feel first is better way. I don't know what I'm doing. Being here. Feeling this. It goes against everything I was taught. Good teaching helps us live, she said, squeezing his hand. Bad teaching keeps us from living. Which is this? Before he could answer, they heard Sarah returning. Mary withdrew her hand, but a line had been crossed. That night, riding home under stars sharp as glass, he wrestled with a revelation. He was falling in love. The virgin rancher who'd never even courted a woman was falling for an Apache woman who, by all rights, should be his enemy. It could cost him everything, his reputation, his ranch, maybe his life. And yet, for the first time since his parents died, he felt truly alive. He thought about Mary's question. Any teaching that kept him from this feeling was teaching worth abandoning. Back at his ranch, he stared at his reflection. His eyes were no longer flat and distant, but alive with possibility and fear. What are you doing? He asked the man in the mirror. Where does this lead? He had no answers, but he knew he would return tomorrow and the day after. He thought of his mother's deathbed words. I'm sorry, Ma, he whispered to the empty room. But maybe you were wrong. Maybe the world's cruelty is exactly why we need to feel too much, not too little. The next morning at the general store, he bought coffee, tea, and after a long hesitation, a small hand mirror with a decorated wooden handle. Got a sweetheart, Thomas? Old Sam, the store owner, asked. About time, boy. Thomas mumbled something and fled, but he couldn't stop the smile that spread across his face. When he presented the mirror to Mary, her face lit up like the sunrise. No one ever gave me gift before, she said quietly. Not like this. Not just because. It's nothing, he said, embarrassed. Just thought you might like it. Sarah, watching, smiled knowingly. Nervous deer becomes brave deer. Good. That night they taught him words in their language. Water, fire, friend. His tongue stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds, making them laugh. When Mary leaned close to correct his pronunciation, her breath warm on his cheek, he felt that electric connection again. Some words can't translate, she said. She spoke a phrase in Apache, musical and complex. What does it mean? Is about feeling, she said finally. When heart recognizes another heart, when souls say hello. As he prepared to leave, Sarah pulled him aside, her expression softer than usual. You're a good man, Thomas, but this path, you know where it leads. No, he admitted. I just know I have to walk it. Mary has gentle heart, already wounded once. If you hurt her, I won't, he said quickly. I'd never. Your world, our world, she gestured helplessly. Oil and water, he said. Or maybe just two people trying to find their way. Young hearts don't listen to wisdom anyway, Sarah sighed. Just be careful, both of you. Riding home, he knew she was right. This path led nowhere good by any conventional measure. But conventional had gotten him 5 years of empty existence. Maybe it was time to try impossible instead. The virgin rancher was learning that innocence wasn't just physical. It was about emotional walls, about the safety of isolation. And once those walls started falling, there was no stopping the avalanche. That night had changed him forever. But it wasn't just the one night. It was all the nights and days that followed, each one stripping away another layer of fear, revealing the man underneath who was capable of so much more than mere survival. The February sun had no warmth, but Thomas barely felt the cold as he worked to repair the TP's entrance flap, his hands now moving with practiced ease. Mary watched him, stealing glances with a soft expression that made his heart race. 3 months had passed. Paths had been worn between his ranch and their camp. He learned to move through the woods like a shadow, becoming part of their hidden world. It had transformed him. You're getting better, Sarah observed, checking his work. Soon you won't need us to teach you. I'll always need, he started, then flushed. Mary looked up with that smile that undid him. We know, she said. Later he followed Mary to the spring to haul water, a routine that gave them moments of precious privacy. I've been thinking, he said, breaking the thin ice with a stone, about spring, when the snow melts. You could stay on my land. There's that old line shack on the eastern border. No one ever goes there. It would be safer. Thomas, her voice was gentle but firm. You know we can't. Why not? I have 300 acres, room enough to disappear. She looked at him with those dark eyes that saw right through him. And when your neighbors ask questions? When men from town visit? When the army comes looking? I don't care what they... Yes, you do, she said, touching his face. You care because you're smart, because you know what would happen. He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. I care more about you, about keeping you safe. Safety isn't hiding on white man's land, pretending we don't exist, she said, pulling her hand away gently. Safety is being invisible, moving like smoke. This is why Apache survive. We bend like grass in wind, not break like trees. They filled the water containers in silence. But as they walked back, Mary slipped her hand into his, just for a moment, a touch that said everything words couldn't. That afternoon, the domestic peace felt so natural it hurt. This was what he'd been missing. Partnership, shared work, comfortable silences, sudden laughter. Sarah told a story about Mary's childhood mishap with a skunk. She smelled for weeks, Sarah said, grinning. No boy would come near her. Is why I learned medicine plants, Mary added with dignity, to never smell like skunk again. Thomas laughed, a real, genuine laugh. When was the last time he'd felt this light? As evening approached, Mary walked him to where Belle was hidden. Stay, she said suddenly. Tonight, stay. His breath caught. Mary. Not for that, she said, color rising in her cheeks. Just stay. Be here when sun rises. See morning with us. He thought of his empty house, the cold bed, the silence that was no longer peace. He thought of the danger he brought by being here. Your sister? Sarah says yes. We talked. The simple statement rocked him. They had discussed it, wanted him. Yes, he said. Of course, yes. That night was different. He was there by choice. He sat by their fire, shared their food. Sarah taught him a card game with stones, laughing when he lost. White men no good at Apache games, she said. Too much thinking, not enough feeling. Story of my life, he muttered, making them laugh again. Later, as Sarah dozed, he and Mary sat close, not quite touching. He was trying to work with beads, his thick fingers clumsy. Why do you bother with me? He asked suddenly. I bring you danger, give you so little in return. She was quiet for a long time. Then, you know the plant that grows after fire? First green in black earth? He nodded. That's you, she said. Everything burned away, but underneath, ready to grow. Just needed right conditions. And you're the rain? He asked. She smiled. We're the spring. You're the one doing the growing. They talked late into the night, voices low. When they finally slept, it was on separate sides of the fire, proper and respectful. But he had never felt closer to another human being. He woke once to find Mary watching him. Sleep, she whispered. Safe here. And he was. Dawn came too soon. Snow melting, Mary said as she brewed tea. Spring comes early this year. He could hear water dripping from the trees. Dread pooled in his stomach. You'll move on, he said. It wasn't a question. When grass greens, Sarah confirmed. North, maybe, or west. I could. No, Sarah said firmly. Your life is here. Your ranch, your future. What future? The words came out harsh. Working myself to death alone? That's not a future. That's just existing. Mary moved beside him, their shoulders touching. 3 moons we've known you, she said. Short time, but sometimes heart knows quick what mind takes long to learn. Thomas turned to her, hope and fear warring in his chest. What are you saying? Sarah sighed. Young hearts, always making things complicated. But she was smiling. We talked, Mary and me, about staying, about possibilities. The line shack, Thomas said eagerly. Like I said, not hiding on your land, Sarah interrupted, but maybe near. There's Good Valley, 2 miles north. Water, shelter, game, close enough to visit, Mary finished softly, to see where paths lead. Something cracked open in his chest, like ice breaking on a frozen river. You'd stay? Really? Not for you, Sarah warned. For us. Because moving always, running always, is no life either. But if you're near, she shrugged, makes it easier maybe. They spent the morning planning, discussing logistics with the care of a military campaign. As he finally prepared to leave, Mary pulled him aside. This changes things, she said. Makes it real, not just winter dream, but spring truth. You understand? I understand, he said. I've never understood anything more clearly. She reached up, touching his face with both hands. My white man, she said, mixing tenderness with teasing. My nervous deer who learns to be brave. My teacher, he replied. My spring after the fire. They stood for a moment, foreheads nearly touching. Then she stepped back, but her eyes held promises that made his head spin. Riding home, he felt drunk on possibility. They would stay, near, as equals. The future, which had seemed so fixed and gray, now shimmered with potential. His ranch came into view, but it no longer looked like a prison. It looked like half of something that might, with luck and courage, become whole. The virgin rancher was learning that innocence lost could be replaced by something better. Wisdom. The wisdom to know that some risks were worth taking, that some connections were worth any price. Spring was coming, and with it a new chapter in a story he'd thought already written. The saloon in Cedar Falls was the gathering place for ranchers. Thomas sat at a corner table, nursing a whiskey he didn't want, listening. Heard tell there's Apache bucks been seen up north, a voice said from the bar. Army's going to sweep through next week. Thomas's hand tightened on his glass. 3 weeks had passed since Mary and Sarah had moved to the hidden valley. 3 weeks of happiness shadowed by constant fear. Dobbs says he saw smoke up near Garrett's place, another voice added. Thomas recognized Pete Henderson's drawl. Says maybe our hermit rancher's got visitors he ain't talking about. The saloon seemed to shrink. He forced himself to take a slow sip of whiskey. He should have known that Snake Dobbs would cause trouble. Thomas keeps to himself, Jim Henderson said from near the bar. Man's got a right to privacy. Sure, Pete countered, long as he ain't harboring fugitives. The conversation drifted. Thomas waited, then finished his drink and left. Once out of sight, he spurred Belle hard toward the valley. He found them by the stream, Mary washing clothes, Sarah repairing their shelter, a clever lean-to built into a cave. Mary's smile faded when she saw his expression. Trouble, he said without preamble. Army's coming next week, and Dobbs has been talking in town about smoke near my place. Sarah stood slowly, her hand moving to her knife. We knew this would come. You have to leave, he said urgently. Tonight. Head west into the mountains. No. Mary's quiet words stopped him. She rose from the stream, water dripping from her hands. We run no more. Tired of running. Tired of being smoke. Mary, please, this isn't about pride. It's about survival. Is it? Sarah asked. Survive for what? To run forever? To never have home? Never have... She gestured between him and Mary. The chance for life? My being alive is better than being dead, he said harshly. Is it? Mary moved closer, her eyes fierce. You lived 5 years dead inside. Was that better? The words hit him like a physical blow. That's different. No, same thing. Body alive, spirit dead. She took his hands. We choose. Stay and fight, or run and die slowly. If you stay, they'll find you. He couldn't finish. The thought of what soldiers did to Apache women was too terrible. Maybe, Sarah said. Maybe not. We have week. Time to prepare. Prepare against the army? He felt desperation rising. What can 3 people do? Not 3, Mary interrupted. More. The Millers. They help. Thomas blinked. The Millers were his nearest neighbors, an older couple who'd lost their son in the war. They don't even know you exist. Ruth Miller knows, Sarah said with a slight smile. Found our tracks 2 weeks past. Came herself. We talked. She said she buried one son already for a stupid war. Won't watch more die for stupid hate. Mary squeezed his hands. There are others. Mrs. Chen at the laundry. Jorge, the Mexican who sells horses. People who know what it means to be hated for how they were born. He sank onto a rock, his mind reeling. He'd thought their secret was perfectly kept. Instead, a network of unlikely allies had formed without his knowledge. How many know? Enough, Sarah said. Question is, will you stand with us or tell us to run? He looked at the two women who'd changed his life. You know I'll stand with you, he said quietly. Always. But I'm scared. Scared of losing you. Mary knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. Fear is wise, but fear that stops living is poison. We taught each other that. They spent the rest of the day planning. The valley had good defensive positions. There were escape routes. Thomas would return to his ranch, maintain normal routines. And if they come here, he asked. Then we fight, Sarah said simply. But smart, not stupid. Apache way. Strike and fade. As evening approached, he knew he had to leave. But something felt final. He pulled Mary aside. If something happens, nothing happens, she said firmly. We survive. All of us. But if, she silenced him with a kiss, their first, soft and sweet and tinged with desperation. When she pulled back, tears stood in her eyes. Now you have reason to be careful, she whispered, to come back. He rode home in a daze, lips still tingling, heart hammering with love and terror. The world had shifted again, become more precious, more fragile. He had something to lose now, something worth any fight. That night, unable to sleep, he cleaned his rifles and counted ammunition. A week. It wasn't enough time. It would have to be. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Ruth Miller rode up, a basket of fresh bread on her arm. She was a small, gray-haired woman, but her eyes were sharp as flint. Let's not dance around it, Thomas, she said, dismounting with surprising agility. I know about your friends. They know I know. Question is, what are we going to do about this army business? Relief and worry warred in his chest. My Harold and I came west to be free, she said firmly, not to watch the same old hatreds play out with different faces. Those girls deserve a chance. The army won't see it that way. The army sees what it's told to see. Smoke from a cook fire becomes a war party. She spat, an unladylike gesture. I've got thoughts on that. They talked for an hour. Ruth revealed a cunning he hadn't expected. She'd already spoken to Jorge and Mrs. Chen. Plans were forming. Misdirection, false reports of Apache signs to the west. It's not about fighting the army, Ruth explained. It's about making them look elsewhere, like a magic trick. After she left, he felt a spark of hope. They weren't alone. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. Thomas visited the valley daily. More allies revealed themselves. A black farrier who knew about hiding in plain sight, a Jewish merchant who understood persecution, even a young cavalry sergeant who'd seen too much violence. Why? Mary asked one evening. Why do they help us? Because, Thomas said, understanding dawning, everyone's fighting their own version of this battle. Against hate, against fear, against the idea that different means enemy. She leaned into him, warm and solid. Strange army we have, she said. Broken people, fixing each other. The best kind of army, Sarah said from behind them. One that fights for something, not against. The night before the army's expected arrival, Thomas stayed in the valley. They sat together around a small fire, drawing strength from presence. Sarah cleaned her rifle. Mary worked on her beadwork, her fingers steady. Whatever happens tomorrow, Thomas said quietly, I want you to know. We know, Sarah interrupted. You love her. She loves you. I love you both for giving me hope. Now stop talking like we're already ghosts. Mary laughed, soft and surprised. Sister's right. Tomorrow we're clever. Day after we're alive. Day after that, she looked at Thomas, eyes bright with dreams. Maybe we start building instead of hiding. Building what? He asked. Life, she said simply. Real life. Not just surviving, but living. Together. The word hung in the air like a promise. Together. He pulled Mary close, Sarah on her other side, and they sat as the stars emerged. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. Tonight they had this. The virgin rancher had found his courage, not in isolation, but in the terrifying, wonderful risk of caring. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it as a man transformed. The attack came at dawn, but not from the army. Thomas woke to the sound of too many horses moving too fast. He rolled from his bedroll, grabbing his rifle. Through the pre-dawn gloom, he saw riders circling the valley entrance. 8, maybe 10 men. That's not the army, Sarah whispered. It was a mob. He recognized the lead rider's yellow coat. Dobbs, and beside him, Pete Henderson. Garrett! Dobbs's voice echoed off the canyon walls. We know you're in there with your squaws. Come out now, and maybe we let you live. Sarah had already melted into the shadows, moving toward a defensive position. Stay hidden, Thomas whispered to Mary. She shook her head, checking the load on her own rifle. We stand together, or not at all. Thomas stepped into view, rifle held ready. This is private property, Dobbs. You're trespassing. Ain't your property, breed lover, Pete Henderson called out. This is open range, and we're here to clean out the Apache trash. Funny how brave you are with 10 men behind you, Thomas replied. Where's your father, Pete? That gave Pete pause, but Dobbs spurred his horse forward. Old man Henderson's gone soft. We're ending it today. The only thing ending today is your welcome in this valley, Thomas said. Turn around. Last warning. Dobbs laughed. You threatening us, Garrett? 1 man and 2 squaws against... A shot came from the rocks above, so close to Dobbs's head his hat flew off. 1 man and 2 Apache women who know these rocks better than you know your own names. Sarah's voice carried, clear and cold. Next one won't miss. The riders milled nervously. The valley entrance was a narrow, perfect ambush. What had seemed like easy prey now looked like a trap. You fire on us, it's murder, one of the men called. Self-defense isn't murder, a new voice said from behind them. The riders spun to find Ruth Miller on her horse, and she wasn't alone. Jorge sat beside her, along with Mrs. Chen's son, David, the black farrier Samuel, and surprisingly, Jim Henderson himself. Pa, Pete sputtered. What the hell are you doing? Stopping you from doing something stupid, Jim said grimly, though looks like I'm too late. They're harboring fugitives, Dobbs protested. It's our duty. Our duty is to mind our own business, Jim interrupted. These women aren't bothering anyone. Only trouble here is what you brought. You taking their side? Pete looked genuinely shocked. Against your own kind? Jim's weathered face hardened. My kind includes decent folks trying to live in peace. Now get on home before someone gets hurt. For a moment it balanced on a knife's edge. Dobbs was calculating the odds. Then one of the riders went for his gun. Several things happened at once. Sarah's rifle cracked. The man cried out, clutching his shoulder. Mary appeared beside Thomas, her own rifle trained on Dobbs. And from the rocks all around, more figures emerged. The young cavalry sergeant, 2 of Jorge's vaqueros, even the Jewish merchant with an ancient shotgun. Enough! Jim Henderson's voice boomed. Dobbs, collect your man and get out. Pete, you're coming with me. The riders broke, wheeling their horses and fleeing. Dobbs lingered, his face twisted with rage. This ain't over, Garrett. You chose your side. Remember that. I'll remember, Thomas said quietly. Question is, will you remember threatening women who defended themselves? Will you remember that good people stood against you? Will you remember anything besides your hate? Dobbs spat, then spurred his horse after the others. As the dust settled, Thomas found himself shaking, not from fear, but from the realization of what had just happened. The community, his community, had stood for what was right. Not all of them, but enough. Mary's hand slipped into his. You see, she said softly, not alone. Never alone. Sarah climbed down from her perch. They'll be back, eventually. Maybe, Jim Henderson said, dismounting heavily. But Dobbs is a coward. Cowards need easy targets. You've shown you're anything but. He looked at Mary and Sarah directly. I owe you ladies an apology. My boy's behavior? That's on me. Your son makes his own choices, Sarah said, but thank you for coming. The allies dispersed. When they were alone again, the three of them stood in the morning light. The attack they'd prepared for had come from an unexpected direction and been turned aside by unexpected defenders. The army will still come, Thomas said. No, Sarah agreed, but it changes how we face it. Not as fugitives hiding in fear, as people with friends, with rights. We don't have rights, Mary said quietly, not in their law. Then maybe it's time to make new law, Thomas said. The words surprised him, but they felt right. As evening fell, he sat with Mary by the spring. I was proud of you today, she said. You stood tall. I was terrified, he admitted. Fear and courage aren't enemies, Mary said. They're partners. She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her. It felt as necessary as breathing. One of Jorge's men, she said after a while. He told Sarah the army patrol went west, following false rumors. They won't be here for days, maybe weeks. Relief flooded through him. A reprieve. Time to plan. I'm thinking about the future, he said, turning to face her. About building that life you talked about. Real life. Marry me. The words hung in the air. Mary's eyes widened. Thomas, I know it's not legal. I know most people won't recognize it. But we could find someone. That traveling preacher. I want to stand before God and whoever else will witness and say that you're my wife, that we're family, that... She silenced him with a kiss. Deeper than their first, full of promise and acceptance and joy. When they parted, tears streaked her face. Yes, she whispered. Though the Creator already knows what's in our hearts. But yes, we'll speak it for the world to hear. Sarah returned as they made their way back to camp. She took one look at their faces and smiled. Finally, I thought I'd be old and gray before you two figured it out. Will you stand with us? Mary asked her sister. When we speak our vows? Sarah embraced them both, fierce and protective. Try to stop me. Someone needs to make sure Thomas doesn't faint. They laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. In the morning there would be new challenges. The threat of Dobbs hadn't vanished. The army would still come. But tonight, in their hidden valley, none of that mattered. They had fought for their right to exist, and they had won the first battle, not with violence, but with community, courage, and the radical act of refusing to hate. The transformation that had begun in a blizzard was complete, forged in the fire of conflict and cooled in the spring of hope. The day after Dobbs's failed attack, Thomas stood in his kitchen, staring at a letter. The Indian agent from the reservation was coming to investigate reports of renegade Apaches. He would arrive within the week with a military escort. He rode hard for the valley. He found Mary and Sarah already packing. No, he said, dismounting. We're not running. Not anymore. The agent comes, Sarah said. Yes, but we have another option. He pulled out a second letter from a lawyer in Denver, Jim Henderson knew. He thinks there might be a way. Mary took the letter, her English reading still developing, but she grasped the meaning. Adoption papers. If I legally adopt you both as my sisters, you become part of my family. The agent can't take family members to the reservation against their will. I know it's strange, adopting the woman I want to marry, but it could work. The sisters exchanged a long look. You would claim us as family, in law, in front of everyone? I already claim you as family in my heart, Thomas said simply. This just makes it official. People will talk, Mary said softly. Say terrible things. Let them talk. Words don't break bones. Sometimes they break spirits, Sarah observed. Break opportunities. No one will buy your cattle. Not no one, Thomas said, thinking of Ruth Miller, of Jorge, of Jim. Enough will. We'll survive. In the end, practicality won. 2 days later, they made the journey to Cedar Falls. The lawyer, a young man named Josiah Blackwood, met them at the courthouse. This is highly irregular, he said, reviewing the papers, but not illegal. The law is silent on many matters regarding adoption and Indians. We'll use that silence. The proceeding was quick, witnessed by Ruth Miller and Mrs. Chen. The judge, an elderly man named Horace Fairweather, looked deeply uncomfortable but couldn't find legal grounds to refuse. Thomas Garrett, he said finally, you understand you become legally and financially responsible for these women? I understand, Your Honor. Then by the power vested in me, Judge Fairweather signed with obvious reluctance. It's done. May God have mercy on all your souls. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. He heard the whispers, saw the stares, felt the weight of crossing an invisible line. But Mary's hand was in his, and Sarah stood proudly beside them. Well, Ruth Miller said loudly enough for all to hear, I'd best get home and bake a cake. Not every day a man gains two sisters. They returned to the ranch to find the traveling preacher, Reverend Michael O'Brien, on the porch. Heard there might be need of my services, he said, eyes twinkling. The ceremony took place at sunset in the valley. It wasn't legal, but it was real. Sarah stood as witness, along with the Millers, Jorge and his wife, Jim Henderson, and young David Chen. Reverend O'Brien spoke of love transcending prejudice. Do you, Thomas, take Mary to be your wife before God and these witnesses, knowing the challenges ahead, choosing love over ease? I do. Do you, Mary, take Thomas to be your husband before God and these witnesses, bringing your strength to his, your wisdom to his learning? I do. Then by the power granted me by the Almighty, if not by the state of Wyoming, he declared, I pronounce you husband and wife in the eyes of heaven. What God has joined, let no mere human law tear asunder. They kissed as the sun touched the horizon, and their small gathering cheered. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a community declaring itself, choosing compassion over convention. The next morning brought reality. At the general store, old Sam refused to serve him. Nothing personal, he said, not meeting his eyes. But I got other customers to think of. As he turned to leave, David Chen stepped forward. His family had recently opened a small goods store. We would be honored to serve you, Mr. Garrett. My mother says anyone brave enough to choose love over fear deserves respect. It became the pattern. For every door that closed, another opened. The banker threatened to call in his loan until Jorge's cousin offered better terms. 3 weeks later, the Indian agent arrived. Marcus Pendleton was a thin, nervous man who kept saying, This is most irregular. But legal, mister, Blackwood, who had come from Denver, insisted. These women are legal members of the Garrett family. You have no authority over them. They're still Indians, Pendleton protested. They belong on the reservation. They belong where they choose to belong, Thomas said firmly. They're free women, and my legal sisters. Your sisters? Pendleton's tone was full of scorn. And yet I hear one of them shares your bed. My wife shares my bed, Thomas corrected, as is proper and right. You can't be married to your sister? The adoption was a legal necessity, Mr. Blackwood interjected smoothly. It in no way prevents a religious or common law marriage, which exists separate from state recognition. Pendleton sputtered and threatened, but in the end he had no legal ground. He left with dire warnings, but he left. That night Mary traced patterns on his chest. We won, she said softly. For now, he agreed. Worth it? She asked. He pulled her close, thinking of all he'd gained. Love, purpose, community, a life rich with meaning. Worth everything, he said. The seasons turned. Sarah, who had taken over the foreman's cabin, proved invaluable with the ranch work. Mary started a garden, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. Dobbs made trouble where he could, but their allies held firm. One evening in late autumn, Sarah said, I've been thinking about the school. What school? Thomas asked. The one we'll build, she said, her eyes shining, for the children who don't fit in the town schools. Indian children, Mexican children, black children. Children whose parents choose love over fear. Thomas looked at his wife, his sister-in-law, his family. A year ago, he'd been alone, frozen. Now they were planning schools, building community. Why not? He said. We've already done the impossible. What's one more miracle? The virgin rancher was long gone, replaced by a man who'd learned that strength wasn't in standing alone, but in standing together. Spring arrived early that year. Thomas stood on the hill overlooking his ranch, but it was no longer just a ranch. It was a community. The school Sarah had dreamed of stood near the creek, children's voices carrying on the wind. Apache, Mexican, black, white, all learning together. "You're wool gathering again," Mary said, appearing beside him. She carried their son on her hip. Little James, named for his father but with his mother's dark eyes. "Just thinking how much has changed," Thomas said, lifting his son high. "Sometimes I can barely remember that lonely man who stumbled into your shelter." "I remember him," Mary said softly, "frozen outside and inside, but underneath, waiting to thaw, like the earth in spring." They walked back to the house, passing the new blacksmith shop, the expanded general store, the neat homes the Quaker families had built. It hadn't all been smooth. His left arm still ached where Dobbs's bullet had caught him 6 months ago, a cowardly ambush. Dobbs was in prison now, but his poison lived on. "Letter came," Mary said as they reached the house. "From Denver." His stomach tightened, but Mary was smiling. He read it quickly, then read it again. "The territorial legislature, they've passed a law recognizing common law marriages, regardless of race. Meaning? Meaning what we have is legal now, not just in God's eyes, but in the laws." He caught her up, spinning her and James in a circle. "You're my wife officially. James is legitimate. No one can challenge that anymore." That evening, they hosted a dinner. The table he had once eaten at alone now groaned under the weight of food, surrounded by laughter. "A toast," Jim Henderson raised his glass, "to Thomas and Mary Garrett, for showing us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it." "To community," Ruth added, "built one heart at a time." Later on the porch, Reverend O'Brien said, "You've built something remarkable here, a glimpse of what America could be." "We've built a target," Thomas corrected grimly. "Perhaps," the Reverend said, "but you've also built hope, and hope has a way of defending itself." As if to prove it, young David Chen approached with several other young men, a mix of races. "Mr. Garrett," David said formally, "we want to form a militia, a protective association for the valley." Thomas felt a surge of emotion. These young men, raised to distrust each other, were choosing to stand together. After the guests left, he and Mary sat on the porch, James sleeping between them. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The life you could have had, simple, quiet, uncomplicated." He thought of the lonely rancher, safe in his fortress of solitude. "That life was already dead," he said finally. "I was just too frozen to realize it. You didn't complicate my life. You gave me life." "Ayanna," she said suddenly. "What?" "My real name. I want James to know it. I want our children to know where they come from. Both sides." He kissed her forehead. "Ayanna, eternal blossom. It suits you." "Mary served its purpose," she said. "Kept me safe. But here now, with you, I can be who I really am." Sarah wanted to travel, she told him. Visit other communities like theirs. Share what they'd learned. Things were changing because people like them were making them change. Standing up and saying, "This is wrong," until others listened. He remained on the porch a moment longer, looking out over the valley that had become more than a home. It had become hope. The virgin rancher was gone, transformed into a husband, a father, a leader. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. There were still those who hated what they'd built, but tonight, with his wife singing softly to their son in a mix of English and Apache, with children of all colors learning together in their school, with neighbors who had chosen bridges over walls, Thomas Garrett felt the truth of what they had accomplished. They had proven that love could overcome fear. He rose to join his family. The door closed softly behind him, but the light from within spilled out into the darkness. A beacon. The Virgin Rancher's story had become something larger, a testament to the power of opening one's heart. He had learned the greatest lesson of all, that love wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength, that opening your heart wasn't dangerous but necessary, that sometimes the best way to save yourself was to save others first. In a small house in Wyoming Territory, three hearts beat together, proof that even in the hardest ground, love could take root and bloom eternal. Thank you for listening to this story of transformation and hope from the Wild West. If you enjoyed following Thomas, Mary, and Sarah's journey, I'd love to hear where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across distances, just like the characters in our story. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of courage, love, and the human spirit triumphing against all odds. What did you think of Thomas's transformation? Share your thoughts below.